1965, 5th grade. From September 1965, June 1966. My age is 10. Martha Client. My life changed for the better during my 5th grade year, all thanks to a remarkable teacher whose name, Mrs. Martha Client, will forever remain etched in my memory. Looking back, I realize that teachers who invest extra effort in ensuring their students learn to spell and pronounce their names correctly often have a deeper purpose. They aspire to leave a lasting impact and be cherished for their positive influence on countless young lives. These extraordinary individuals are the epitome of excellence, the philosopher teachers. Mrs. Client was my first encounter with one of them. Teachers like Mrs. Client are unique people whose energies and love are devoted to helping shape the clay of children's lives, molding them into people whose futures will be brighter as a result. These are teachers who are not simply going through the motions, not just looking to put in their time until retirement, looking for opportunities for self-promotion. They are looking to make a lasting impact on the lives of youthful innocence and society as a whole. They are people who recognize the diamonds in the rough. I believe I was one of those inconspicuous appearing gemstones. During the first of the school year, I began coming out of my shell and started a few short-term friendships with a couple of classmates. One was a chubby boy, as I remember him, who spent his time drawing Rat Fink characters during class. I would go to his home after school once, and his entire room was covered in drawings, including some plastic figurines of comic-looking figures. Another temporary friend was living with his grandmother at the Commander Apartments. Mrs. Client would become the principal the following year and saw something in me, beginning with one homework assignment on outlines. I know now why this homework assignment had fallen within the wheelhouse of my rational, analytical personality. That and I became good friends with Nick Ainsworth, the only other analytical I had encountered in life up until then. This combination of factors sets the stage for a transformative journey. Smoke bombs. As was typical for me, while my brothers were out playing with the neighborhood kids, I was in the basement trying to make gunpowder for firecrackers with the chemistry set I had gotten for Christmas. No, I never worked out the gunpowder formula, but I did find out how to make stink bombs. As I recall, smoke bombs combined saltpeter, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. I even had fuses. Lighting up homemade smoke bombs around the yard became boring after a time. So when I got a dare from the neighborhood bully, Scott Smith, I gladly took the challenge. The neighbor's garage, an older couple who never liked kids, seemed the perfect target. She was the type of old spinster who always worked in the yard and could be heard yelling at kids from time to time, things like, "Get out of my yard, go ahead, get." Her attitude made her a bit of a target for brats like me. I snuck up to the open garage door with Scott watching from his banana seat bicycle. I lit the fuse, tossed it in, and watched for a moment to ensure it caught. The stink bomb began to fizzle with sparks, followed shortly by billowing smoke. It smelled just like rotten eggs thanks to the active ingredient sulfur. Success! Suddenly the door to the garage began to open. The last thing I remember is catching a glimpse of the old hag as she stood motionless in bafflement. I took off running and heard her shout something as I hightailed to hide. Had I made it? Had she recognized me? There were, after all, dozens of kids in the neighborhood who could have fit my description. Indeed, she couldn't pick me out of a lineup even if I lived right next door. It turns out she got a little help uncovering who the culprit was. Scott ended up turning me in, probably to save his skin. Nick Ainsworth Nick was my first true friend, one of the few INTP and possibly Sigma male types I would come across in school, a person who I felt a kinship with because we shared similar traits when it came to personality. INTPs account for less than 1% of the world population and are rare individuals. The same is true for Sigma males. Others often view us as aloof and unemotional with an unusual, dry sense of humor. When we come across types like themselves, we tend to bond with one another even if we may come from different backgrounds. Why? We tend to think alike. 5th grade teacher Martha Client a year later must have recognized our compatibility, sitting Nick just ahead of me when she began noticing my analytical strengths from assignments. I remember Nick being easy to talk with, unlike other kids, especially girls, and cut of the same cloth when it came to sarcastic wit. There were many firsts and many lasting to-dos that resulted from our friendship. Nick would first enter the stage in fourth grade, where he and I would jostle to be the last boys standing in the occasional class spelling bee contest. I picked up my first tennis racket for a tennis lesson at Boone Park. This was back when etiquette required everyone to wear white. White shorts, white socks, white collared shirt, boring. The tennis balls, too, were all white and therefore dull. Everyone made do with wooden tennis rackets, which would warp just about anywhere unless you used one of those wooden brackets with tightening wing nuts. This was the era when England, its colonies, and a few outsiders dominated the sport. There were stars like Margaret Court and Rod Laver winning most of the tournaments, all wearing white and with their wooden rackets, appearing to be playing a game similar to badminton. Wood rackets have very little power, and they are also horrendous for creating spin, both top and underspin, so the game was just one step above badminton, also very dull. I suspect now that I had not made a good impression, and I was never invited again. In all likelihood, I had been playing baseball for some time out at the Naval Air Station, and I might have used the same sort of swing I used to swat baseballs out of the batter's box. This would not have been a good idea. Tennis is a game where ball control is all important, whereas with baseball, you're trying to knock the leather off the thing. This one episode, however, instilled in me a desire to later pick up a racket. This would occur a decade later during a period considered by most to have been the heyday of professional tennis. I would attend my first symphony with Nick. We tried to weather the boredom by seating ourselves in the balcony. We later gave up trying and went out to the lobby. Standing, looking out through the large pane windows, we each tried to outguess the other on the make and models of cars as they came into view. "That's a Plymouth Barracuda," observed Nick. "Here comes a Dodge Dart," I respond. "That's a Ford Mustang," adds Nick. We might have dined atop the Universal Marion building at the Embers restaurant earlier that night. This revolving restaurant was like so many that began to appear soon after the Space Needle came on the scene at the 1962 Seattle World's Fair. My friendship with Nick introduced me to a lifestyle only a few 10-year-olds experience. We remained friends until I moved to Southside and attended Landon Junior High. Nick would go on to attend Episcopal High School and later Duke University. I would go on to become a long-hair, not sure what or where I was going, youth, matching the sentiments of most of those around me at both Wolfson and later Englewood high schools. Of one thing I'm sure, Nick gave me a glimpse into what it took to succeed academically. He played and explored like the rest of the kids, but only up to the hour he had to head home to do his homework. I cannot help but think that Dad's status as a minister may have influenced Nick's family's willingness to introduce me to some of the finer things in life. The Ponte Vedra Country Club, my first deep-sea fishing trip, the spinning restaurant atop the May Cohen's building, and the numerous sleepovers. The exchange for silver coins with local Avondale vendors on some weekends. Witnessing my first manatee in the creek that ran through his backyard. The unseen river monster that got away, rod and reel and all, on the neighbor's private dock down at the end of his street. Outside my friendship with Nick, who had a strict schedule of piano lessons and studies compared to me, other things kept me entertained. Dad had bought and showed me how to play ping pong in the basement. Outside Dad, I remember only one neighborhood kid who knew how to play, Scott Smith's brother, Butch. Neighborhood bully Butch was in junior high, and had come over when he learned I'd clocked his younger brother, Scott Smith, the neighborhood bully, with a right-fisted roundhouse. I thought he'd come over to kick my ass, but Butch admired me for putting his younger sibling in his place. He wanted to know how I did it. As I explained, I was shooting basketball hoops in Ronnie's backyard, waiting for him to come outside to play, when Scott and his cohort in crime, Johnny Schmidt, showed up and decided they needed to exercise their bullying tactics on yours truly. I can't recall what was said. There was likely some pushing and shoving followed by several, "What are you going to do about it?" I quickly considered my options. I couldn't run. I was surrounded. He wasn't listening to my reasoning like, "Come on, leave me alone." Then I remembered Popeye. What was it that Popeye would do in this sort of lousy predicament? Slug him. Wait, what? Slug him, if you say so. Whack! A right roundhouse, closed fist, of course, to Scott's right temple. I watched, expecting the worst and a similar response, but instead, his tears greeted my eyes. Holy Moses, he's crying like a baby. Now I decided it was a good time to run. Johnny Schmidt was stunned. caught off guard by the sudden turn of events and giving me the chance I needed to make my escape. Johnny caught up with me when I was halfway home, but with no Scott in sight. After a few words between us, and he let me run home. The next day at lunch, all the school bullies gathered around Scott. There was some verbal back and forth between me and them, but Scott remained quiet. After yesterday's feat, I had more confidence in myself, replying, "I'll knock all your heads off if you bother me again." Word had gotten out. I had put Scott Smith in his place. I was not to be trifled with, and Butch would darken my basement doorway that afternoon for a round of table tennis. No, Popeye never really entered my mind at the time, but my unconscious, primitive mind? That was an altogether different question. Had watching all those Popeye cartoons growing up paid off? We may never know. Sports. During the summer and spring months, I was to become active in Little League Baseball, first at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, then playing for the Pepsi-Cola Cubs. I played right field for a team, with my most unforgettable memory being a night game when a home run fly ball came arching through the darkness my way. Running full blast without a thought for the fence and eyes facing upwards, focused on the rapidly falling ball, I abruptly stopped with a crash. I picked myself up and looked in my glove. No ball. I looked down and around me. There it is. Picked it up and hurled it toward third base just as the runner passed second base. I heard the coach yell, "Are you all right?" I looked myself over. Everything seemed normal, just a tiny cut and bruise. I'd live, just another day in the life of a baby boomer kid. Other sports I was introduced to were the occasional golf outing with Dad and church members to one of the public golf courses, and tossing the football with Dad and my brothers out in the street. Then there was a weekend afternoon at the bowling alley with my brothers, Dad, and occasionally Nick. Bowling, at least in my early days of the so-called sport, was frustrating, often leading me to quit halfway through a frame in tears, only to sit about moping while my brothers and Dad continued enjoying themselves. So far, I have discovered I was average in almost every sport I had tried, especially bowling with gutter balls the worst. School other notable events for the school year, at least those that stand out in my memory, included learning cursive writing and the recirculating fan I'd watch with anticipation for the relief from the heat it briefly provided. There was the day I had remained mute throughout the class because I had ripped out the seat of my pants, only to be given leave to go home for the day by Mrs. Clyett when I explained why I was acting so strangely. Then there was the homemade kite flying contest in March, where Nick and I won the highest flyer award with a pretty standard four-pointed kite with a tail. We had come second to the engineer's daughter, Beth's box kite, an unusual design only her father could have created. Halloween, 1965. There was my first school Halloween carnival. I can remember enjoying myself with my friend Nick at my side. What made this event even more exciting was that it was only the beginning of a week-long festival that would include a trip to the Jacksonville Fair and conclude with Halloween. It was a Friday evening when the playground from that day had been turned into a magical wonderland, where the bike sheds became game booths, where the loudspeakers played hits by the Beach Boys and songs like Wipeout and Pipeline. There was the smell of cotton candy and popcorn filling the air. The candied apples we each bit into without care of breaking a tooth. The earthy smell surrounding the pony ride. The less than spine-chilling screams from the library turned into a lame, haunted house. Balloons bobbed along with the skipping, running, and jumping of groups of unsupervised skipping and running kids. This day was truly memorable, so much so that the week of Halloween, the expectations of what I experienced had become, is still my second favorite holiday of the year. Patrol Boys and Sigmas. One of the big deals for boys in 5th grade was being selected for the Patrol Boys in 6th grade. Toward the end of 5th grade, I discovered I had a chance to become a patrol boy. This revelation came about when I encountered Chad Nussbaum, the captain of the Patrol Boys at the time. It happened when I decided to take a different route than Chad's all-important backwoods crossing, which lacked sidewalks. Instead, I opted for a shortcut through a neighbor's yard that I had used for most of the year. Surprisingly, despite this deviation, I had never been challenged by any of the other patrol boys. Since my house was conveniently located just a stone's throw away from school, on the other side of the street I needed to cross, I had been taking a direct path towards it instead of following the diagonal route required by the patrol boy crossing. "I'm going to report you if you cross there," Chad shouted. "Hey, I live right there." I pointed to my house with a finger. "Doesn't matter. You can't cross there." I'm thinking, what a poo-poo brain, that doesn't make sense. "Don't do it." The individual in question displayed signs of a power trip, perhaps striving to embody the characteristics of an alpha male. On the other hand, I would later come to realize that I aligned more with the traits of a Sigma male. With both of us engaged in this minor power struggle, it was clear that one of us would lose. Determined, I made the conscious decision that he would be the one to lose face in this situation. "Hey, what's your name?" he demanded once I crossed and went home. I ignored him and continued walking home. "Hey, you, come back here." Despite having a sense of foreboding, I was aware deep down that my actions would lead me into significant trouble. However, I acted on instinct at the time without fully comprehending the underlying reasons driving my behavior. In 1965, conventional beliefs surrounding social hierarchies for males and females predominantly categorized individuals into two distinct groups: alphas or betas. There was little recognition or consideration given to any intermediate or middle ground between these two classifications. Alphas are commonly characterized by their aggressive nature, excessive confidence, extroversion, dominance, and constant desire to lead and stand out from the crowd. They tend to be easily identifiable due to their loud and assertive behavior, frequently exerting their power and authority. On the other hand, betas are often perceived as timid and submissive followers, representing most of the population. Chad seemingly assumed I belonged to this category of individuals who blended into the crowd and lacked assertiveness. However, it was not until the beginning of the 21st century that a new category emerged within the alpha-beta theory. Allow me to introduce you to the concept of the Sigma male. I was delighted to discover that this category resonated with my personality. Sigma males are individuals who prefer to operate independently, often possess unique qualities and perspectives, and do not conform to traditional social hierarchies. They tend to thrive outside mainstream social dynamics, making their own path rather than seeking dominance or submission within a group. Indeed, Sigma types have little interest in assuming either a leadership or a follower role. They do not feel the need to be loud or aggressive to attract attention. Unlike betas, Sigma individuals are neither shy, introverted, nor strive to blend into the background. Instead, they embrace their individuality and are content with being themselves. Sigma males, and possibly their female counterparts, find satisfaction in pursuing their own interests and are unburdened by the opinions or expectations of others. They are comfortable in their skin and do not want to prove themselves to anyone. The idea of being part of a human herd or conforming to societal norms is something they particularly disdain. Due to my independent nature, self-reliance, and non-conformist mindset, I anticipated trouble awaiting me the next morning. Chad made his presence known by appearing at the classroom doorway half an hour after the class had started. The teacher called me out into the hallway, accompanied by hushed whispers from my classmates. The atmosphere felt heavy with tension, resembling the feeling of being led toward the gallows, filled with apprehension and a sense of impending doom. In the hallway, the patrol captain, who was noticeably smaller in stature, wasted no time presenting his case for why I should be sent to the principal's office. He eagerly advocated for severe consequences, even going as far as suggesting involving my parents in the disciplinary action he wished to see imposed upon me. "Is this true, Frank?" asked Mrs. Cleat. I nodded. Mrs. Client's response took me by surprise. "Frank, don't you want to become a patrol boy?" What? Being a patrol boy had never been within the realm of my imagination, yet there I was, witnessing her admission that it was indeed a possibility. As I nodded in response, tears welled up in my eyes. However, these tears were not a result of fear concerning the principal or involving my parents. Instead, they stemmed from the realization that I might have jeopardized my opportunity to become a patrol boy. "Frank, rules must be followed." "Yes, ma'am." "Okay then, tell Chad you will never disobey the rules again." "Okay, sorry, Chadley. I promise never to do it again." Napoleon enjoyed the part of seeing me cry, but otherwise seemed concerned I had gotten off too lightly with barely a slap on the wrist, especially considering my affront to his alphaness. Afterward, I was permitted to wipe away my tears before returning to my seat, but her comment echoed in my mind. She entered a few moments later, having a private conversation with Chad, presumably to offer him solace for the relatively mild retribution I had faced. The rest of the day I felt elated, with the idea of becoming a patrol boy constantly occupying my thoughts. Becoming a patrol boy would ultimately serve as my initial stride towards emancipating myself from the looming influence of my preacher father. Unlike Napoleon, my father was taller but possessed similar alpha qualities. I have distinct memories of Chad eagerly awaiting another blunder from me, yet it never materialized. Meanwhile, I nurtured the aspiration of becoming a patrol boy, believing it would guarantee my impeccable conduct for the rest of the academic year. I would later discover from Mother that Mrs. Client had not only recommended me, but also had to overcome the objections from my fourth-grade teacher, whose name I have long forgotten. Closing points, drawing, or attempting to draw, Big Daddy Roth Rat Fink characters early in the year with a new friend in class. A red diary with a key lock arrived as a Christmas present. I diligently kept up my entries for 1 month. Hit songs for the year included A Groovy Kind of Love, Lightnin' Striking by Lou Christie in December 1965, and one of the Ainsworth family's favorites, A Taste of Honey by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. The movie The Blue Max, starring George Peppard, was released June 21, 1966, when Nick and I watched it at the Cedar Hills Theater, our last movie as close friends. Sadly, I heard from Mother that Mrs. Client passed away much too soon just a few years later, and as for Nick, he would become an eye surgeon like his dad and eventually open up his practice in Palatka.